Hey, this is John Leon Guerrero. Our guest today is Dr. Tim Furnish. He's been on the show several times, and you should go back and listen to all of his appearances. He's been very generous to us, and we really appreciate him. He's an author, a historian, and just a solid guy whose brain packs an awful lot of horsepower. But let me shift gears for just a second. The other day, my wife, who's been binge listening to our back catalog, asked me and Pete some questions about the show. Like, do you have a top 10? Have you ever just been dumbfounded or starstruck at any of your guests? Has anybody ever blown your mind? And have you ever had somebody come in on the show and really change your mind about something? And the answer to all of those questions is hell yes. Yes, I have a top 10. Yeah, I have been dumbfounded and starstruck at a couple of our guests. Maybe Pete hasn't, but we've had some pretty remarkable folks on our show, and a couple of times I haven't been able to help myself just sitting there and marveling at some achievement that has changed society in some way. I absolutely have had my mind blown by some of our guests and the ideas and the tenacity and some of the unstoppable grit that several of our guests have displayed in something they've done. And yes, I've gone into several conversations with my mindset on something and have had guests with a considerate, thoughtful, researched, and developed opinion change my mind. The leader in that category of guests is probably Dr. Tim Furnish. I don't always agree with him, but I can always count on him to have a sincere desired outcome, even when our approaches are different. Like I said, he's been very generous with us, and I'm very lucky to have his insight and his friendship. As always, if you like what we do, we ask that you subscribe to us on iTunes and give us a 5-star rating and leave us a review. And if you don't like what we do, we still ask you to give us a 5-star rating on iTunes and leave us a review. It really helps the show get profiled and get noticed, and we appreciate it. If you're listening to us on YouTube, please hit that subscribe button and hit that bell to get notifications for when we drop shows. Again, we really appreciate you listening, and we really hope you'll enjoy our guest today, Dr. Tim Furnish.
Lions Rock Productions.
This is Jay Moore.
This is Greg Proops.
This is Jordan Harbinger.
This is Dexter from The Offspring.
This is Nathan
This is
East.
Sebastian Younger.
This is Rick Marotta.
This is Stuart Copeland.
This is Mick Gillette.
This is Andy Summers.
Hey, this is Skunk Baxter.
This is Gabby Reese.
This is Rob Bell.
Hey, this is John Leon Guerrero.
Hey, and this is Pete A. Turner.
Hi, this is Dr. Tim Furnish. You're listening to The Break It Down Show.
And now, The Break It Down Show with John Leon Guerrero and Pete A. Turner.
Tim and I have been talking about something that's been troubling me, and I thought we might examine it for a little bit. And you'll probably hear this theme come through now as we do shows here in the next few weeks. But there's this thought that patriotism, to be a patriot is okay in the U.S., but patriotism is somehow not okay. And Tim, we have a lot of international listeners. We've got an audience in, I don't know, I think it's 80 countries every month consume some show reliably, right? So there's a lot of places out there that, we're talking to. So in terms of patriotism in the U.S., there's people that are sort of hijacking this and making it a negative, and like saying, well, all isms are bad. Like, I don't know. I mean, are all isms bad? Ism is a neutral suffix. I mean, I know about words, and I don't know what it is about patriotism that would be bad. I mean, we're not talking about condoning being a dick to someone or being evil or oppressive, but do you have a sense that and maybe I'm wrong in putting this on you, but is patriotism supposed to be a negative thing?
Well, no, I don't think it is, and historically it hasn't been. And I think, Pete, what's happened is for several decades, the left has not been fond of nationalism. There's been this conflict between globalists and nationalists, and there are some very salient critiques that could be made of nationalism. They did have a lot to do with certainly the First World War. One could argue with the Second World War.
Sure.
And they still have a lot to do with some of the ongoing conflicts around the world. But that's, in a sense, throwing the baby out with the bathwater. I mean, I think we've moved far beyond that. I think many on the left now are to the point where they don't just question patriotism, as you said, they question the very idea of the nation state. The very idea of the nation state, which goes back, at least to Westphalia in 1648. One could argue certainly developed before that. I mean, the Romans were pretty damn proud of being Roman Republic and then Empire citizens. The Ottomans were proud of being citizens. The Ming Empire, I'm sure people were proud of being citizens of the Ming Empire, or subjects, I should say.
Yeah.
So this idea that, the nation state does change a bit, I guess, with what happens after Westphalia. Basically, you can define a nation state. I usually do it for world history students as sort of people that have a plot of land that usually speak the same language and are usually the same religion or culture, that have a flag that they put up. Mm-hmm. And that's sort of the bare bones definition of nationalism. And it's been around with us for a long time. But what's happened in recent years is a lot of people on the left and some very powerful thinkers, and this idea has become embedded, I think, in what used to be the liberal side of politics, both in the United States and to a certain degree in I think in Western Europe anyway, is the idea that the nation state itself is bad. It is the cause of problems in the world. But Pete, I think as you were starting to get at there a moment ago, it's like some people's nationalisms are worse than others.
Yes.
I mean, I never hear. Irish nationalism, no one complains about, right? You go to U2 concert, and Bono talks about Ireland. Nobody gets bent out of shape.
Right.
I don't think Finnish nationalism or Japanese nationalism or Ethiopian nationalism causes consternation among people. So it's only certain kinds of nationalism, and I'd be willing to bet that it has a lot to do with the fact that the nationalism that many on the left excoriate and condemn is the nationalism, particularly of Europeans, and particularly Western Europeans, and particularly within that of countries that were colonialist. And so I think a lot of this condemnation of nationalism is, I think some of it is honest, and people really do think that, but I think a lot of it is just political. It's a club with which to beat the rich developed countries of the first world, particularly the Western ones, because no one beats Japan up about this usually, and sort of try to change policy and try to get things enacted that you want. Like, for instance, the thing about immigration and illegal immigration. Well, if you're against illegal immigration, you are, first of all, you shouldn't be against it, because somehow the problem that the fact that people are poor in Mexico is somehow the fault of the United States, though no one ever explains that.
Yeah.
And if you aren't really ready for totally open borders, you should be, because the United States was colonialist and, trot out the Gadsden Purchase or something, although many on the left probably never heard of that. and so beat people over the head with it it's a political club with which to shame people into doing what you want them to do. I think that's a lot of it. Although I do think, again, there are some on the left that really do think that that the nation state is the cause of most, if not all, of the evils on the international scene.
You've brought up a lot of really good points, and this is why I want to examine this topic. And we're really going to get to your article here in a minute, but this whole thing is it's my bigotry is better than your bigotry. It continues to be this thing instead of I don't know, I guess being more stoic and working on, our own internal problem, and withstanding the fury around us and creating strength within. So, yeah, sometimes the patriotism stuff is a little Homerish, like it's too much, like, okay. You go out and you render salute as you raise your flag every morning, and okay, but you get to do that in this country, right? I don't think it's bad to be proud of a country where people are willing to leave their homeland, motherland, fatherland, whatever one you want to call it, and risk everything to come here, and then within a generation or two, be completely immersed in what we do here and have real opportunities. I mean, everybody's got a grandpa who came here with a pocket full of silver spoons and a dream. That sounds like a pretty awesome place that continues to draw a lot of people in. The immigration stuff is tough because we're not properly provisioning ourselves at the border. And honestly, I don't think a wall is immoral. I think a wall is a reasonable way to try to get people help as soon as you can. Because look what happens when they come across the border and we have to put them behind a wall. Like we get mad at ourselves. Right. So it doesn't make us a bad country. It makes us a country where there's so much opportunity, and our immigration policy is a really shitty funnel. If you put someone who's desperate and they want to come here because they think they've got a shot, and I've heard this over and over again overseas. I would just if I could just get to America, I think I could do it, because then it's up to me. It's up to me, and I can outwork whatever problem is out there.
Right.
These are good things. When you have all of these mega billionaires that are saying, it's important to me that this money, when I goes to help all these things. We have national museums that are funded by people that are wealthy. Yeah, the wealthy have a stake in things, and they own some responsibility, and they provide a lot of help, but they don't. A lot of us think that they don't. But look at what happens when someone like the Rockefeller family, how much help have they provided throughout the years and done things that nations can't do. So there's a lot to be proud of. Yeah, our athletes oftentimes use chemicals to cheat. We're as guilty as anybody else. But I still love that we're out there competing and pushing the balance. You don't throw the baby out with the bathwater, like you said. So when it comes to patriotism, yeah, there are some negative things that you could push on it, but really being proud of the place that you're from, being proud of a place that says, anybody, come on, let's go. We want you to be part of the team, and that it resonates throughout the world. I just don't understand the self-loathing. I don't understand. It's like we're, and really the U.S. is like this. We're like a big dumb adolescent that has a cutting problem.
Right. Well, Pete, my bottom line is like this. Another thing I tell world history students, especially in the modern world history class, we're talking about, for instance, the Cold War. And I always say, do you know how many people died trying to get from West Berlin into East Berlin?
Oh, man. Yeah.
A whole hell of a lot fewer than died going the other way.
Yeah.
How many people died getting on rafts in Miami trying to get into Cuba?
No, come on.
I'm like, yeah, exactly. I mean, if this country is as racist as people like Ilhan Omar make it out to be, why do we still have illegally 1 million people coming in a year and illegally God knows how many more of that?
Yeah. And how did she become... how great is the country where a Somali refugee who hates us, we're like,
is in Congress?
Yeah. As much as I don't care for her.
I know. It basically boils down to, does that mean America's perfect? No. Does that mean I like that Lee Greenwood song? God, no, I hate that song.
Yeah, that's too much, right? Yeah.
Oh, it's hokey and it's goofy, but I don't want to hear that. Give me Hendrix playing the Star Spangled Banner any day over that. But it's, again, Pete, looking at this as a historian and as a patriotic American, despite the fact I don't like Lee Greenwood, I was saying to my wife yesterday, we were talking about this, and I said, I can't think of another example of a society or a culture or civilization in which there were so many that just, aren't just critical of our society, but are just downright based on what they say. I can't read their minds and do a Vulcan mind meld, but based on what they say and write, they seem to despise this country. They think the system's wrong. They think that there's nothing good about it.
Yeah.
What level of historical ignorance does it take to condemn George Washington for having slaves, in 1795?
Right.
For God's sake, do you know nothing about the world in the 18th century? But clearly you don't. And this whole idea that, I'm pretty sure we, as this culture, as a society, we've paid for our sins with the Second American Revolution, the bloodiest war in our history from 1861 to 1865.
Yeah. Yeah.
We paid for those sins, and people like Beto O'Rourke and these other people, several people on the Democratic side, this country is systematically racist. It was steeped in racism. I'm like, oh, for God's sake. You have that is taking the utopian idea of political ideology and applying it and not realizing that the world, what the world is really like. You can't apply utopian standards.
Yeah.
Nothing was perfect in 1800s, when they wrote the Constitution in 1787, for gosh sakes. But it created a system that has allowed more economic freedom and more political freedom than any system on the face of the earth in history. And people that can't appreciate that either are truly ignorant or just willfully ignoring that fact.
Well, and this is, is our American civics class, and we will study this more, and I really will bring some political scientists on and some more historians like yourself. But yeah, we blend three unique freedoms: personal, political, and national freedom. And we have documents that protect each one of those, or establish what they are. And that's unique. You're not going to find that in a lot of other places. There's not a queen on the wall of our banks and our federal buildings. We've got a president, and we can fire that dude pretty much whenever we want, every 4 years, right?
That's true. And if he's bad enough, we can fire him in between.
Yeah. So that's an incredible thing. And as much as, you don't have to agree with the protest you see, but it is an exercise of freedom. So, when members from the U.S. national women's team use the flag in protest, and other members from that snatch the flag away, so to not allow them that's our national conversation. And those freedoms go to, I don't know, let's just say anywhere in Asia and exercise that kind of freedom.
Right.
Right. Watch out. And I'll say it, anywhere.
Good luck with that.
Anywhere in Asia. Right. And yet, and I won't identify the person, but I did have, and I will say gender because it'll help with the story. I sat across from someone who was proud of their country of origin, and talked about my country, like she wasn't part of this country, looked down on me because I was a dude, because I was white, and while she had a lot of opportunity given to her because she came here, and someone's like, yeah, we believe in you. Here is hundreds of thousands of dollars to get you started on your way. And the very success she has, she looks at me, and I have nothing to do with this person's success. I'm literally doing them a favor. I'm helping them expand their brand. And I get this look of disdain and disgust. And it's like, I didn't say anything offensive. I try to not be too offensive. I try not to be offended. And it's just, Tim, I don't get it. I don't understand. I want to understand it. I want to understand how we can look at patriotism. And again, our country's not perfect. We have a crumbling infrastructure. We can't get anything through Congress because we're having this conversation. Apparently, abortion is still a conversation we need to have at the national level. So, okay, I don't get to like those things, but that is where we're at. But it doesn't make this a bad place.
No. And again, it's this rampant, the idea that has become very regnant, I think, on the left is a utopian ideal. If something is not perfect by the standards, particularly of the modern social justice warrior, it is to be condemned. There is nothing good about it, nothing redeeming about it. And that's just ahistorical. That's just people that don't live in the real world. There's never been a perfect utopian society, and I'm pretty sure there never will be.
And anytime anybody brings up utopia, especially left-leaning people, I'm compelled. I cannot help it. It's a failing of mine. But I'm like, do you have a command of Thomas More or Erasmus at all? And Utopia and the whole story behind that?
Yes, of course. What's the word literally means no place.
Right.
So
yeah. And that's the great dichotomy. It's like the perfect place, no place in the same basic word. And Hafliday, his name literally means the purveyor of nonsense. And he tells this story of like, if you understand that, you understand like the political commentary that's still relevant today. So, a lot of our problems we try to solve, and you as a history person know this, are the same problems, maybe on a different scale or whatever, that the Sumerians, the Greeks, the Romans, the Turks all had to deal with. And some of them, let's not act like we invented racism, It's just...
I know. And what's very, very, very disturbing, Pete, is the marriage, or the attempt to marry, I should say, by some on the left to marry any form of nationalism or patriotism with white nationalism.
Yeah.
Again, it's just ridiculous. I mean, where on the face of the earth are there more opportunities for more people of different skin colors than the United States of America?
Yeah.
But most Americans don't give a damn about your skin color. Yeah. They just don't.
Right.
And this
That's
idea,
true.
I mean, the ones that are obsessed with skin color are the ones on the hard left.
So look, the right has plenty of problems, but what troubles me is that the left is supposed to be the open-minded, the bleeding heart liberals, and they've become horribly bigoted and totalitarian. And that scares the hell out of me because I was kind of relying on them to not do that,
Right. I know. Well, again, the circle back to where we started here with isms, this idea that nationalism is the worst ism around. Well, there's this little thing called communism that's been a bit problematic in history.
Yeah.
And these are more the sort of ideas that are being actually Maoism in some ways. I mean, there are people in this country, and they're on the left. Maybe there's a few on the right, Pete, you're right. But I think for the most part, they're on the left that would like to send people to re-education camps if they had power.
Yeah. Yeah.
And that's a scary thought. I think the better angels of our nature will win out, our national nature, and I don't think those people will get power. I think they'll continue on their sniping and carping from the extreme left. But on the left, there are people that have a bit more sense too, that I think are trying to rein them in. You see that with this whole thing with Pelosi and Ocasio-Cortez, and so I mean, I'm hopeful about it, but again, I don't know. If people like that ever came to power, they might want to have a cultural revolution here.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it's this what. Anyhow, you know what? Thank you for going through that with me, because I am trying to understand it better, and I've got to gather other perspectives, and certainly I'm going to have to gather some perspectives from folks who are much more extreme on the left to get a sense of, is patriotism as a definition moving? Because I was shocked to hear that it was a negative thing to be a patriot. Mm-hmm. Yes, you can be too much. Yes, there's a whole bunch of dicks in every aspect of life. But like you said, is there a country that's more stable, more diverse by self-selection, by the way? Mm-hmm. We're not comparing like Indonesian diversity. We're talking about people from all over the world choosing to add to our mix of diversity. And like you said, for the vast majority, like, yeah, cool, come on, how can I help you? Or I'm just going to leave you alone and do my own shit, right? I mean, it's a remarkable place that is something to be proud of. And like Bono talks about, it's an idea. And we're always having a conversation with ourselves, but I think we can all give ourselves a bit of a break, too. We've done a lot of good work, and for the most part, most everybody can outwork whatever lack of uplift they've got, and there's a whole lot of external help to get to. I mean, we have the Small Business Association is out there to help small business people get a leg up. They will gladly help you. Mm-hmm. Okay, they don't go up, but you're brown. Sorry, they just want to help. Let's get into your article, man, because we definitely could have this other conversation for a long time. And this will give us a chance to whack back at the right a little bit, because I think what you've said in this is a much more, liberal, and I mean that in like the academic sense, a liberal way to look at this whole thing. So give us, just the abstract version of the paper, and then after that, if you would, slide right into kind of defining, because a lot of us don't know what about Shia and the way that how Shia is fragmented. Because I think that's central to your theme. Yes,
that's. I'm writing pretty regularly, about weekly now, over at thestream.org, which is just. I like it a lot. It's ecumenical, Christian. Lots of folks there, different Christian denominations. Right. It's conservative, but not hard right. But a lot of thoughtful stuff. So I'm happy to be writing over there. But my latest piece was called "Do Iran's Leaders Want to Hotwire the Apocalypse?" And it's something I've been talking about on and off for several years. Excuse me. Because starting about, a decade ago, I started seeing just all kinds of absolute false stuff being put out about this. And these absolute false ideas have really become conventional wisdom in the in much of the American evangelical community, Christian community, and also in the among many in the GOP, and I think it's to some extent driving policy among some people. And this false idea is that the reason Iran wants nuclear weapons is because the Twelver Shiism of Iran, that branch of Islam that is the majority and the ruling branch of Islam in Iran. There's an idea that they want to do something that's called hotwire the apocalypse. They want a nuclear weapon so they can use it probably on the Israelis, and this will somehow spark Allah to send the 12th Imam, who's the messianic figure in that branch of Islam, who will then take over the world, take over Iran, take over the world, and then the entire world become Muslim, and particularly, of course, from this perspective, 12 Shia Muslim. And as I point out in the article, this idea of hotwiring the apocalypse does exist in Islam, but it exists in Sunni Islam, and it's an idea that I found some belief in groups like ISIS, and then even there were some echoes of it in Al Qaeda to a certain extent. But particularly in ISIS, there's an idea of this, that if you, and I say in the article that if ISIS or Al Qaeda got their hands on a nuke, I don't think they'd hesitate if they could find a way to get it to the United States to use it on us or on the Israelis, if that's as far as they could get it. But this idea does not exist in Twelver Shia Islam. Twelver Shia Islam, and I've studied some of the writings of the Imams, and I've studied Iranian stuff that's been put out since the revolution. And based on what I've been able to find, there is no belief in this. This was basically created out of whole cloth by Glenn Beck and by this fiction writer named Joel Rosenberg, whom Beck used to have on a lot. Beck used to be, remember, years ago on Fox News, and he went over, I think he was on CNN or Fox for a bit. I went from CNN to Fox, and then he went to, he created that Blaze TV. But he has this guy Rosenberg on all the time. And just recently, I mean, I had an embedded link in my article from just, I think it was last year, where Beck is saying the same thing, that the Twelver Shia want to spark the coming of the 12th Imam, and that's what they want nukes for. No, I again, based on my research, Iran does not believe this. The leadership of Iran no doubt wants nuclear weapons, but they want nuclear weapons because they saw that once North Korea had nuclear weapons, for instance, nobody will touch them because they can hold Seoul and Tokyo hostage. Iran wants nuclear weapons, so the Ayatollahs can basically have regime insurance. That way they can hold, Riyadh and whoever else they'd like to, Baghdad maybe, in nuclear hostage. So I think that's what's going on here, and that was the main point of my article. The Iranians do believe in this return of this. Let me back up. If you tell me the Sunni and Shia thing, all right? Both the Sunni and the Shia believe in a messianic figure called the Mahdi, M-A-H-D-I, means the rightly guided one. In Sunni belief, the Mahdi has never been here. The Mahdi will come toward the end of time, but before the end of time, and he'll be sort of he'll be like a regional ruler who comes to power, and he basically will start conquering, and he'll eventually conquer the Middle East, and eventually people will realize, oh, this is the Mahdi. And he will eventually take over the world, and then you get all this sort of eschatological wrinkles thrown in where Jesus will return and reveal he was a Muslim and works with the Mahdi, and there's an Antichrist figure and stuff like that. The Twelver Shia, however, have a different belief. They believe that there were 12 imams, 12 rightful leaders of the Islamic community descended from Muhammad through Ali, and that the 12th of them, who was also named like the prophet, he was named Muhammad, he disappeared in the 9th century AD. Now, as a Christian and as a historian, I happen to think that this poor kid just died. But you can't say that he died because then your branch of the religion dies out. So they came up with this elaborate metaphysical theory and story that the 12th Imam, Muhammad al-Mahdi, did not die. He went into a mystical state of what's called in Arabic ghaiba. Ghaiba means it's like occultation or eclipse of the moon. He's not dead. He's there, but you can't see him, just like when the moon is in eclipse or the sun is in eclipse, whichever. They believe that this kid disappeared, and he is the one that will emerge from this mystical state of hiding before the end of time to be the Mahdi. But unlike with the Sunni Mahdi, who's some guy that will just gain power, and then eventually he'll be acknowledged as such, the Twelver Shia Mahdi, the 12th Imam, is some guy that you will instantly know because he's returned from this mystical hiding. And this is why, as I point out in the article, nobody can really claim to be the 12th Imam because it's just too startling, and it would be what we say in the idea in Christian thought of a theophany. It'd be a revelation. There have been lots of guys in the Sunni world across space and time that declared themselves to be the Mahdi, and that's what my very first book, Holiest Wars, was about. Like Muhammad Ahmed in Sudan back in the 1880s. There was a guy named Ibn Tumart in North Africa back in the 12th century. There was that guy Juhayman al-Utaybi and his brother-in-law Muhammad al-Qahtani in Saudi Arabia in 1979. The so-called Siege of Mecca. A lot of people have heard of the Siege of Mecca, where basically a Salafi jihadist group tried to take over Saudi Arabia, but a lot of people don't know that one of the guys involved in this, they claimed he was the Mahdi. So this happens quite a bit in Sunni thought and in the Sunni world. But it's never really happened in the Shia world, in the Twelver Shia world, within the last 500 years, because again, it's just you'd have to metaphysically, magically, supernaturally appear out of nowhere and then claim you're the Mahdi, and that one's kind of hard to pull off. So anyway, but the bottom line of this is that I see this idea repeated all the time, and I do some stuff from Newt Gingrich and Benjamin Netanyahu, who of course not an American leader, but a pretty important guy, seem to believe this. They've repeated this, that Iran wants nuclear weapons to destroy, to launch it against Israel so they can cause the coming of the 12th Imam. And I think a lot of this was, to a certain extent, driving this idea that we should militarily attack Iran because we have to stop this from happening. And I end the article saying, look, maybe at some point in the future, the United States might wind up having to attack Iran. But if we do so, let's make it based on actual analysis of what they believe in Iran and not something that somebody made up about what they believe.
Yeah. Okay. Whew.
Sorry about that, Pete.
No, that's good. But this is what I want to do for friends that are listening, because this is fascinating. So let me back up and give you some bona fides, because it's important to do that. Tim is a veteran, of course. We love our veterans because that's what we do around here. But he's also, are you ordained, Tim, or did you?
I did not get ordained.
So yes. You went through seminary, though, right. So you know about. So you could say, it's fair to say that you're a biblical scholar, I guess, at this point. You're also an expert on the Middle East and Islam. So when we talk to Tim, we're talking to someone that actually went to school and had to stand in front of his peers and defend his.
Yeah, my PhD, my PhD from Ohio State is actually on Sunni eschatology, but Sunni beliefs about the end of time. Yes.
Right, which puts you squarely in the zone of being, one of the few experts in this field. In terms of the globe as a whole, you can talk about eschatology, and especially from the Sunni side, and then the Shia side, you're required to know about that for what you do. So let's understand who Tim is and what he does for a living, because this is significant, and we're allowed to get upset about it. But the reality is unless you deal and you have a command of your of the writings of Dr. Tim Furnish, you really are spouting off from a position of a compromised position. You just don't have the literature in your head. So that's why we have Tim here to help us understand this stuff. So Iran is being a dick right now. It continues to be so. And before we go too far, we have to understand that the U.S. in general, and I guess you could say the West, has been really shitty to Iran in its recent history as well too. And by recent, I mean in like the lifetime of people that are on the earth, the U.S. has definitely been unfavorable towards Iran, and they have a right to be pissed off.
Yeah, primarily, well, two things. I think one is, of course, we worked with the overthrow of Mossadegh back in the early 50s, who was basically an Iranian nationalist, Pete. A nationalist, what? Yes, I know, a non-American nationalist. He was an Iranian nationalist who was elected prime minister and wanted to nationalize the oil industry, and the U.S. and the Brits did not want that to happen then, and we engineered him being kicked out of power, street protests against him and such. And the other big one that people forget about was the Iran-Iraq War from 1980 to 1988, which killed probably 1 million Iranians, and which was started by Saddam Hussein. And basically, we greenlighted Saddam on that.
This episode of the Break It Down Show is brought to you by Lions Rock Productions.
That's us.
We publish, evaluate, and develop podcasts just like this one, consult others to build their own, and create associated content and content marketing strategies.
So if you're launching or expanding your social media presence, your business, or your personal brand, or if you just want to take your media presence to the next level,
reach out to us on Twitter
at Pete A. Turner
or at JohnLG69
at the Break It Down Show.
There's 1,000 ways to get a hold of us.
Now enjoy the show.
And basically, we greenlighted Saddam on that because this was only a year or so after the revolution had occurred in Iran, and there was a great concern that it was going to spread, particularly to the 12 Shia majority in Iraq. And Saddam basically was greenlighted by us. We provided him intelligence. We may have provided him weapons to fight against, to invade basically Iran. And that war went on for 8 years and was very, very nasty.
Iran has some reason to be a little bit salty towards us because we really have done some. We started a proxy war against them, or at least authorized it, green-lighted it, and handed out weapons. So,
but Pete, let me say this. Let the reader or let the listener understand. I am not pro-Iranian. I know, as you said, right. The leadership of Iran is a bunch of dicks in turbans. You're exactly right. I may embellish that.
Yeah, yeah. And we're not. So I guess the reason why I want to make this clear is that we have to understand that we have some culpability in the situation, and have done things that if someone did them to us, like Russia impeding our election, like this is the shit that we do. We go out, and when it goes sideways, it creates these negative things. So we went into the Iranian region, and we've asserted our authority and denied them their sovereignty. So let's understand that. Now let's get into the dicks and turbans and talk about what's going on there, because they're one of the rogue states. They're one of the very few places, one of the few nations in the world that sponsors terrorism, and not just. And this, you'll appreciate this, Tim. We had a new guy come in where I was at, and he was a scholar, and he wanted to really dig into the religious aspects in Iraq. And I'm like, they're really not that religious here. They're more like Jack Mormons. They want to drink. They, we're Sunni, we're Shia, but what we really are is mad about something else. And he's like, no, you have to understand who their marja is and get into the marja and where they're. And I'm like, honestly, no. And I'm like, let me prove it to you. Let's go into the SCIF, which is the place where they process top secret information. And I said, I'm going to, without being in here at all, I know that there's analysis that clearly links Iran and Saudi Arabia because they're trying to undermine their neighbor. And I'm like, oh, well, look right here. Here's a guy here on a link diagram. I don't know who his name is, Abu something, but this guy is tied to both both Saudi Arabia and Iran. So Iran does play both sides. They do fund Shia and Sunni militants, if you want to call them something nice.
Well, yeah, they clearly, but Hamas and Hezbollah. Hamas is Sunni, arch Sunni, as a matter of fact, and normally wouldn't have anything to do with Shia, except when they're sending them a lot of money and weapons. And of course, Hezbollah, which dominates southern Lebanon and is coming to dominate Lebanese politics, has been funded by Iran for years because they're fellow 12 Shia. Yeah.
And again, it's important to say this because you understand this is not necessarily about religion. There are other aspects in play. And I'm going to shut up because I want you to talk about the play for power in the region and what's going on in terms of how Iran is trying to.
That's a very good point, Pete. And sometimes I write so much and talk so much about the 12 Shia aspect of Iran as I was saying, in relation to this article, for instance, and their geopolitical aims with nuclear weapons, that I kind of skip over what's probably just as important in Iranian thought, which is, bingo, Iranian nationalism. All right. The Iranians have a view. It's really strange. I mean, the leadership is ardently 12 Shia, and 98% of the population is 12 Shia. For instance, when I was in Iran, I went to Iran 2008, was there for about a week and a half, got invited to a conference. I was in Tehran, made a trip to Qom, got to see Jam Quran Mosque. But I was wandering around Tehran as much as they would let me with the minders following me, went into a couple of shops, and I was amazed at how much Zoroastrian stuff there was. And for folks that don't know, Zoroastrianism was the religion of Iran before the coming of Islam. If you go back to, if you go back to the wars with the Greeks and all the way up until, from the 6th century BC, when the Great Persian Empire, the Achaemenid Empire was created, the one that fought the Greeks, and then up through the Parthian and Sasanian empires, which were the ones that existed, particularly the Sasanian Empire right before the Islamic conquest. So for like 1,000, 1,100 years, the empires of Iran were all Zoroastrian. And in fact, it was under the Sasanians. If you go back, if you Google maps of the Sasanian Empire and look at how far Iran extended, it was enormous. It went to the Gulf. It was up into Central Asia. Much of what now is Iraq. Iraq was part of that. A lot of Iranians, you can find stuff put out by Iranian geopolitical thinkers and even Ayatollahs, talking about how proud they are of, the greater Iranian state or the greater Persian state. And there are people in Iran that probably think in terms of incorporating some of that area back into what they rule. And this has a lot to do with what's going on with Iraq. A lot of what's going on with Iraq comes up under the guise, I guess, from the Iranian perspective of, we're co-religionists. We're 12 or Shia. The Iraqis are something like 65 to 68% 12 or Shia. And a lot of the 12 or Shia holy sites, like Karbala and Najaf and the like are in Iraq. It was interesting also when I was in Iran, I remember I went over to see the old Qajar palaces, and I was talking to one of the minders they'd sent with me who I think was trying to set me up, but God, I'm not that stupid. Very attractive young Tehran University English major, right? Attractive woman. Mm-hmm. And I'm like, God, guys, do you really think first of all, I don't cheat on my wife. And secondly, I'm sure as hell not going to cheat on my wife in a foreign country with a woman wearing a chador over top of her jeans, because I don't want to spend the rest of my life in a VIN prison. But I'm talking to this gal, and she was telling me how her family had recently gone on pilgrimage to some of those sites in Iraq. And I said, you do realize that you wouldn't be going to pilgrimages to sites in Iraq unless the United States had gotten rid of Saddam. She kind of looked at me funny because she never really thought of it that way. But a lot of, I think, what's going on with Iran vis-a-vis Iraq is it's simply geopolitical, and it's, they'll try to portray it as it's all, well, we're trying to help our fellow co-religionists, even if they don't want help. But I think a lot of it is simply they look at a map from these old Persian empires, or you don't have to go back that far. Go back to the Safavid Empire, which ruled Iran from 1502 to the early 18th century, which was actually the dynasty that converted Iran to 12er Shiism. Iraq was basically a buffer zone between the Ottoman Empire, which was Sunni, and the Safavid Empire, which was militantly 12er Shia. And for much of that time period, Iraq belonged to Iran, basically, or to Persia, the Safavid Empire. So I think a lot of that is nationalism. Iran, again, I think it's about 50-50 in terms of influence. A lot of the influence, a lot of the factor, 50% of the factor, I'll put it this way, influencing the Ayatollahs and what they do is 12er Shiism. The 50% of it is simply hardcore, hard-nosed geopolitical realpolitik. So the countries that border them, like Iraq, they would very much, they're looking at that long term. They're looking at, 50, 100 years, because they think they'll be in power then, that regime will still be there. They think that will become part of greater Iran. I think that's the way they look at that. And that would be sweet for them too, because there's a lot of oil fields in that area, right? But further afield, they tend to focus to some extent, they tend to exploit the religious differences for their sort of own nationalist geopolitical aims. Again, as one we mentioned, Iran doesn't like Hamas, and in any other situation, people like Hamas would be attacking 12er Shia. But since Hamas happens to lob, missiles at the Israelis every so often, then Iran's going to support them, right? And it's very much the same way in Yemen. Yemen, which is way down in the southwestern corner of the Arabian Peninsula. Yemen has about 30 million people, and about 40 to 45% of that population is Shia. They are not exactly the same kind of Shia. They're not 12er Shia like Iran or Iraq. There's something called 5er Shia, or Zaydis. And there are some very major differences between them. But, looking at it overall, they are closer theologically and religiously to Iran than they are to, say, Saudi Arabia or to fellow Sunnis. Now, we hear a lot about this in the news, and again, this is something else that I get that the right just gets wrong about this. Iran did not start that fight down in the corner of Arabia, okay? Iran did not start that. Iran has certainly piled on and exacerbated it and thrown fuel on the fire. But Iran is down there, and I don't think the Iranian leadership really gives two damns about the people of Yemen. Why are they down there? Because it causes problems for the Saudis, right? That's the big reason they're down there. Yemen, of course, borders Saudi Arabia. Yemen has a population as large or larger than Saudi Arabia. Most people don't realize that. Yemen is the most populous country on the Arabian Peninsula. And again, large percentage of them are Shia. So the Iranians piled in there a few years ago and started providing funding and weapons to the Houthis. The Houthis are the major tribe. They are known historically as Zaydis. That's their form of fiber Shiism. Major tribe is the Houthis. But this is not something, again, that Iran created. I've done quite a bit of research on this. There were Shia. There were connections. Well, let me put it this way. There were Shia in Yemen going back to, the 10th century AD or so. They've been there since that long. And there were connections actually between them and the Iranian ayatollahs across most of the last 500 years or so. Anyway, but not to get too arcane here, but basically what's going on is Iran is trying to stick it to Saudi Arabia, who is their major geopolitical their major geopolitical enemy in the region, supporting that proxy war against the Saudis in the southwestern corner of the Arabian Peninsula as a way to do it. Of course, there are basically three major powers besides Israel and the Middle East, three major Muslim powers, and they are the most populous Muslim countries. You could argue four, I guess. It's Iran. The three most populous countries in the Middle East are, of course, Iran, Turkey, and Egypt, each which has about 80 million people. Egypt is really not that involved in what's going on in the Middle East these days. I think a lot of it has to do with Egypt has its own problems with trying to recover from the rule of the Muslim Brotherhood and al-Sisi. Although large parts of Egyptian society like al-Sisi, he's very illegitimate with much of the Sunni conservative Salafi population. Because, whatever we say about it, Mohammed Morsi did legitimately win that election, and then they kicked him out of power. So Egypt is kind of having to take care of its own internal problems. Is not involved that much in what's going on. Turkey, I swear, it's interesting. Turkey is probably, if you really broke it down, Turkey would probably be the natural leader of the Middle East, the most powerful country. Militarily, it's certainly the most powerful country, I think it's safe to say. But Turkey, you can't really tell. Sometimes I can't tell what Erdogan's doing. So, and I'm not the only one there either. I think it's a bit overstated sometimes, the stuff we get about Erdogan being a dictator and so on. Because as near as I can tell, he's won his elections, and his party did actually lose that last election in Istanbul, which was interesting. But anyway, Iran and I do think that long term, the differences between Iran and Turkey will come to the fore. They have sort of papered over them in recent years, and they've kind of been getting along fairly well. But you look back at that, hundreds of years of acrimony between the Ottomans and the Safavids, or the Ottomans and the Qajars, whichever dynasty ruled Iran. And I think that just because of and beyond that, just the geopolitical rivalry between the two, I don't think that Iran and let's put it this way: a lot of people on the right try to make out that Iran and Turkey are creating some sort of alliance, and I really don't think that's going to be the case. But clearly, the biggest bone of contention there is between Iran and Saudi Arabia, because that's where the real conflict is right now.
One of the problems I think we have in general is, as we look at this, and I don't profess to have an in-depth knowledge, nowhere near what you have, but I have a sense for a lot of these things. So help us understand when whoever it is in Iran says our intention is to wipe Israel off the map and annihilate them. I've seen the word annihilation used. And then they are heavily pursuing nuclear things. So press pause on that. Let's go look at China. China's got an exploding because capitalism works, middle class, and they have to provision these people, if they want to stay in power. You can't deny them what they need. So China's always brokering and finding ways to do things. So Iran is not a poor country. It's not a weak military. They have a lot of things, especially in their region. They are, if not the top dog, among them on their own right, without any kind of help from the outside. So when they say we're going to remove, despite all the Jews that have a history of life in Iran, when they say, and this is how complicated this stuff is, Tim, right? When they say we want to explode and fund terror against Israel and wipe them off the map, and we're also going to go pursue nuclear things, why would we trust that they don't want to go drop a nuclear bomb on Israel?
Pete, every example I've looked at where Iran says something like that, and not to be, this, some of my friends get annoyed with me that I do this, but I've looked at a whole lot of those statements, and every one I looked at, the Iranian leadership will say something like, yes, Israel should be wiped from the face of the map. Israel will be wiped from the face of the map. And then if you go and read actually what the context of what they said it will be when the 12th Imam comes. When the 12th Imam comes, right, he will wipe out Israel. I've not found one example where the Iranians say, we're going to do it. We're going to wipe out Israel. They say it should be. They say it will be. They'll say they want it to be. But then if you really unpack the context, every one that I've looked at, it basically is, it's an eschatological context when the 12th Imam shows up. He'll take care of those damn Zionists when he shows up.
Yeah.
Now maybe, and some people, I've had friends saying this is legitimate. Well, if you lived in Israel, would you want to live on that difference? I said, no, probably not. I said, but just think about this. Apply Occam's razor. If Iran used a nuclear weapon on Israel,
right,
22 minutes later, as soon as the Israelis could arm and launch, Iran would be a radioactive parking lot.
Could we also even go further than that and say Israel is a pit bull with a bad attitude in terms of internationally, especially regionally? If Iran was actively pursuing nuclear weapons, which, let's be honest, they likely are or have in the recent past done that, Israel's going to work its damnedest to exploit that information. So there's a big risk, because we know that Israel has no problem flying over your border to go drop some munitions on whatever they think is a threat to them. They are very proactive. So is it fair to say that Iran is checked in part by Israel's pugnacious defense?
Yes. For sure they are. And also I think that they realize, I think that there's a very good chance that whoever would happen to be the American president, if the Israelis were to be attacked with nuclear weapons by Iran, we might get in on that too. But regardless, conservative estimates are Israel has anywhere between 100 and 150 nuclear weapons. That's a conservative estimate. And if Iran gets one or two, it doesn't make any sense. And the Iranians, the Ayatollahs are a lot of things, but stupid is not one of them. Stupid and suicidal, No way to go through life, son. Fat, stupid, and suicidal. It's just not Animal House reference. I'm sorry. They're just not going to do it. And again, if you look at it, I looked at a bunch of these, and every one I've looked at, the Israelis. It sounds like I'm an Iran apologist on this, but I'm really not. I'm trying to look at this objectively. They never say we're going to destroy Israel. As soon as we get a nuke, Israelis, you've had it. They never say that. They say when the 12th Imam comes, and that sort of thing. And I think that's a huge difference.
Yeah, which again, there's a big difference, and I don't blame Israel for having a robust and aggressive defense of their sovereignty and their lives. I definitely don't blame them for that. But that also pushes Iran to flex out their muscle. Like, hey, you need to understand, there is I wouldn't call it even a soft power war there, but there's a definite pose down that's happening. And I definitely agree with your assessment that it doesn't do any nation any good to drop nuclear munitions state on state. Maybe they do it surreptitiously through whatever, but develop that and to ship it to a secondary agent, a proxy, is still dangerous because, apparently people keep top secret information on their home servers and hire counterintelligence agents to drive them around in our country. So we have to assume that Israel is actively looking at the people that they legitimately hear, you want to kill us. Okay. And here's the other thing. Like you said, the imams are not stupid. When you go out, and here's where Golda Meir kind of protected Israel for decades, and you attack us, we will sacrifice ourselves just to exact vengeance, and go out and whack people. Here's what the Israelis did for the audience. They don't know this. These are my friends, so you guys will appreciate this story. The Israelis, and I'm saying this in general, the operators took out an ad saying so much for Tim Furnish's life. He got blown up by a bomb. But Tim wasn't dead. It's like they let him know that they were going to come get him. Okay, so it was definitely a terror, venge-filled attack that they did. And that has to still resonate with Hezbollah, Hamas, all those groups that target Iran, and especially all those groups that target Israel, but especially Iran, because they look at that and go, the last thing we need is to create someone who has given up everything except for to come and explode himself or, deliver some kind of horrible thing to our nation, to my life.
Yeah. And plus the Iranians, I think, are given pause by the fact that basically the Israelis and the Saudis are in a covert alliance right now. Neither one of them can admit it openly. But really the Saudis and the Israelis, they're not worried about each other anymore. The Saudis are not. And they're both far more worried about Iran than they are about each other.
Do you feel like this is capitalism? Like they have too much to lose? Like Qatar has definitely bought in. A lot of the other places in the Middle East are like, yeah, we're religious and we're, hardline with these things, but we also understand that there's a lot, like it's better for us overall to push our narrative and our politics towards the more capitalistic venture, or is that too hopeful?
Are you talking about Iran?
Well, I mean, in general, like Iran, how about Saudi Arabia and Israel partnering? Like it's better for both sides, even if they don't get along well, that they get along and allow, financial
Yeah, I think that's a big part of it because, the Saudis spent years and years helping the Palestinians and spending a lot of money on them. And what have they gotten for it? They're like, Israel's got all that high tech. We would like to maybe learn from that some and trade with these guys. This initiative that Mohammed bin Salman's come up with, and unless things change radically, he's going to be the next king. Big part of this initiative they came up with was what was it called? Something Initiative 2030 or something, where basically Saudi Arabia, the leadership of Saudi Arabia has realized, we won't always be swimming in oil. We need to diversify. We need to have a tech sector. This is why he's made some moves to try to get the Wahhabi prohibitions against women in the workforce relaxed, because he's made statements about we can't have half of our people basically with manacles on, which is really what they've done with women, but that's a fight between the political side of the coin and then the Wahhabi ulama, the Wahhabi clerics there. But I think part of that is they see a very small country like Israel, which basically has no natural resources, which is wealthy and has a very high developed tech sector and a very advanced military. And I think besides just trading with them, which would be lucrative, I think the Saudis are like, we can learn something from these guys.
Yeah, I mean, you look at the gold that is in the Silicon Wadi, which is the sort of the Silicon Valley version in Israel, and all of the stuff with decentralization and boy, there's just a really powerful tech industry going on there, and they're partnered with the Silicon Valley directly, access to those angel investors. And if you want modern gold or modern oil, it's technology. I mean, these problems are being solved, and yeah, to take on the power structure of Israel when it's backed by the U.S. and other places, at some point it becomes a fool's errand, because it's not even a Pyrrhic victory. Like, you're just going to lose because it's just not going to happen. And the more you poke them, the more they will fight with fury. Like, if Saudi Arabia is going to, kind of mess around at a level 6, and kind of poke them at 6 out of 10, Israel comes back at a 95. They will come back and they will kill the most important thing in your life. And then just because it's just not worth it to take them on.
And the Saudis, Israel's never really attacked them. Without them starting something first, and they're like, we're not worried about Israel. We're worried about that country with 80 million people who is stirring up problem down in not just our southwestern corner, but also over in the eastern province, because there's 15-20% of al-Hassa and the eastern province of Saudi Arabia are Shia. So they're like, Iran's the problem.
Right.
It's the regime. It's the Ayatollahs that are the problem, not Netanyahu.
So I want to spend a little more time, because I think it's just great to have you on and kind of paint this thing. And I know we're sort of, finger painting, but we had you on before Donald Trump was president, and you talked about what the next president might do to try to chill out the Middle East. And we were talking about Donald Trump specifically, but he hasn't done the things that you prescribe. So if the next president, even if it's Donald Trump, was to say, "Hey, Tim, how do I work with the Middle East here? What am I going to do to obviously reduce terrorism, but get them even more, like, how do we chill out Yemen, and how do we flatten some of this tension that's out there?"
Oh gosh, I don't know. Let's see. If I were President Crenshaw, what would I do?
Uh-huh.
Yeah, I don't know that much about him, but just the optics of President Dan Crenshaw with that eye patch staring across the table at an Ayatollah, that would just be worth it, I think, just for that. I don't know. We'll see. Basically, I think that assuming Mohammed bin Salman becomes the next king of Saudi Arabia, I think that's very promising, because he seems to be willing to take on the fundamentalist Wahhabi power structure in a way that no other ruler ever has been willing to do so. So I think the president is right. I mean, he came in for a lot of criticism, particularly after the Khashoggi thing, the murder of Khashoggi, which pretty much looks like it was done by somebody in Saudi intelligence, doesn't it?
Mm-hmm.
But he came in for a lot of criticism because why are we buddying up to them? Well, again, even acknowledging the fact, which I will be happy to do so, that Saudi Arabia is a profoundly schizophrenic country. Politically, it's been our ally since the days that FDR and King Ibn Saud were hanging out on the destroyer and talking. But religiously, the ulama are, about one angstrom unit different from the ulama that tell ISIS what to do. They really are. There's not a whole lot of difference. But that said, Saudi Arabia clearly is one of the most pro-Western countries in the Middle East. I mean, all of those guys get their, they all go to Harvard, right? All those princes, they all go to Harvard.
Right.
So I think long term that will have a big influence. And I think Saudi Arabia has its problems, but you get these people saying that Saudi Arabia is the world's chief sponsor of terrorism. No, it's not. Look at where the funding comes from. The world's chief sponsor of terrorism, as we can tell, is Iran. Now, that said, I think in the long term, and this is why I don't totally fault Obama for what he was doing. I think in the long term that Iran is much more of a natural ally of the West and of the United States than it is an enemy thereof. We talked about Iran, some of the complaints Iran has against us. Well, we did do some things to them that were nefarious and negative in the last 50, 60 years. But Iranians know that if you go back, it's really people in the region that have caused more problems for them. They've had much more problems in the past with Britain and with Russia than they've had with us. So I don't know. And also there's I think a religious element here that if you really look at 12 Shia Islam, despite the fact that the main purveyors of it in the modern world, the Ayatollahs that run Iran, are sponsors of terrorism. I think that's more of a political issue than it really is a religious issue. If you look at 12 Shia Islam, it is much more flexible than Sunni Islam. In many ways, it allows for a form of ijtihad, of updating religious beliefs, of updating things that are said in the Quran and the Hadiths that really none of the schools of Sunni jurisprudence allow these. So I think that in the long term, and again, I'm not sure how long that long term is. It may be 15, 20 years. It may be a century. In the long term, I think that the chances for reform of Islam within Twelver Shi'ism are probably greater than they are within much of the Sunni world. So I think that's something that might want to be kept in mind. I mean, I know if you're president, you can't bank on that. You got to look at who's sponsoring people that blow your people up, and that's the salient issue. So the big issue in the Middle East is Turkey. Again, Turkey is really the 800-pound gorilla. It has the largest military in the Middle East. It has the largest economy outside of Israel's among the Muslim countries. It's a NATO member. But then we just saw the plane this morning arriving from Russia, bringing surface-to-air missiles, Russian surface-to-air missiles to Turkey. Why in God's name is a NATO member receiving surface-to-air missiles from Russia? So look, I think that the president of the United States, this one or the next one, really needs to focus on the situation with Turkey. And he'll come in, he or she will come in for a lot of criticism if you sit down with Erdogan. But look, the man won elections. I don't care what the extreme right says. The man has won his elections. He's not a dictator. He's a bit autocratic. I'll give you that. I'm not sure that whole coup thing wasn't ginned up. But the man won his elections. He's the ruler of that country. And so I think the next president of the United States really should make probably a mainstay of his Middle East foreign policy, figuring out a way for us to get along with Turkey and to figure out what's going on there and how we can work better with that country.
Yeah, because Turkey, they put the bizarre in bizarre, and you can get anything there. They're part European. They're not the sick old man of Europe anymore. They're absolutely Middle Eastern. They're also Asian. They're white, and yet they're not white. They're all these different things where, they are they're the Janus of the world. I mean, they really are both sides of a coin in every single way.
In Istanbul, you've been there, right, Pete? The greatest city on earth.
Yeah,
I love that place. My favorite city.
It's such a complex thing that they have, and you're right. I mean, if you can get, as a president, if you really want to stabilize that region, that is a great place to focus your attention. And like any good president, most everybody's going to be pissed off at you and hate that you're doing it, and you might fail. Maybe timing is not on your side, but you would be smart to spend a lot of time on your foreign policy by focusing right there in the belly button.
And again, with the major fact that they're the NATO member with the second largest military in NATO.
Yeah. You just when you think about that part of the world, like, so we have Colonel Yuri Raitsalo, and he teaches at the Finnish Defense University, and he talks about how there's many Europes. Turkey's in Europe, and Turkey is nowhere near what Sweden is or what the Nordic countries are. That's how complex all of this stuff is, and it's cool to be able to have you on to kind of flesh out some of these complexities, because what these regions of the world don't tolerate are simple ideas and silver bullets. They just there's no werewolves over there, just really fucking hard.
And that's something that you get from the right and the left. Everybody thinks there's easy answers, which are often based on their ideology instead of reality. And again, that's why, for instance, I wrote that article. I'm like, oh, come on, people. If we're gonna go after Iran, let's do it based on something that's rooted in reality and not something somebody made up by reading the Book of Revelation. And again, I'm a Christian. I take the Book of Revelation seriously. As I say in the article, I'm pretty sure it's not a policy manual.
Yeah. Well, listen, I've had you for over an hour, and you've been great. You played with patriotism with me, and you gave us a great laydown of this article. I'm glad we were able to flesh out a lot of your thoughts therein. I just have one basic question left, and this is just more from my understanding, because I know you've got a command of the X of Jesus. Is it fair to call Jesus a Palestinian Jew? I was told this the other day, and I thought that does not seem right to me. But I'm not an expert.
Well, look, There was no political entity called Palestine. Okay, if you go back to the Roman times, the Romans had taken over there in first century BC and gradually picked off more and more of the minor kingdoms there in what is now Judea, the old Hasmonean kingdoms and the old stuff that had Jewish kingdoms that had then been taken over by the Greeks in the wake of Alexander the Great's conquest and his generals taken over. There were, if you go look at maps, Roman maps, there were provinces in that part of the Republic and then the empire that had the term Palestina attached to them. So it was sort of a geographical term. You could say it that way. But, when was that Sarsour that said that, I believe? Linda Sarsour said that. Clearly, I think what she's getting at is just demonstrably incorrect. I mean, in terms of nationality, there was no Palestinian state. It was part of the Roman Republic and then the Roman Empire. So Jesus, It would be more accurate to call Jesus a Roman Jew, or maybe a Jew.
Well, yeah, right. Or a Galilean Jew, if you want to get regional.
Yeah, exactly. So that's just, I'm sure she's got her political reason there. She's trying to, as much as she can, delegitimize Israel or something. But there was no Palestinian political entity then, and so it's not really accurate to call Jesus a Palestinian Jew or call Jesus Palestinian anything. And he certainly didn't speak Arabic. I mean, he spoke, as near as we can tell, he spoke Aramaic. He spoke probably Greek, and he probably spoke Latin, based on the fact that every time a Roman centurion talked to him, Jesus spoke back to him. So, but he didn't speak Arabic.
Yeah,
because Arabic had not come to that region yet.
Right. Well, listen, thanks for settling that, and I appreciate it. Let's have you on again soon. Let's do another album fight again soon, too.
Sure. Love it, Pete. Thanks.